I guess of all the stories that I've produced for this project, Purgatory's probably been the biggest surprise to me because it ended up going in a direction that I hadn't planned. As a standalone episode, it was designed to be very open and shut. I deliberately didn't want to turn it into World War Z, which it feels like every other zombie movie does. It wasn't about an uncontrollable outbreak. It was always going to be about how both sides in the battle responded to the outbreak, not about the outbreak itself. There weren't going to be massive tentpole action scenes, no huge tales of human sacrifice. The purpose of the zombies is to act as a mirror for the worst sides of Germany and Russia in this conflict. The plan was always to have them turned loose by the Russians, but then have them contained and then removed. But once the episode was out there, it became clear that there was more to it. I couldn't just leave it there. And actually, it was some of the characters that came out during the course of the writing. I felt a need for them to come into future episodes. So in a way, Purgatory was going to end up acting as a springboard for supporting characters elsewhere in the project. To pin down the origins of where my zombie virus has come from, one of the biggest influences came from World War Z, the book written by Max Brooks, which incidentally is the best zombie book ever written. It was an alright movie, but it was an amazing book. And if I could write to that level and create a universe to that extent, I'd be a happy man. The origins themselves are relatively innocuous, and it's the fact that the Russians first encounter it during the Russia-Chinese War of 1929, which is probably a little-known part of history. It was a 6-month period where the Red Army, after a series of reforms, attacked and seized a number of territories from the Chinese, whose army was relatively unprepared for a conflict at the time. And during this, you have a detachment of Russian troops, including Sorokin, encounter Patient Zero somehow in an isolated area of Chinese territory, potentially a small island set in a larger river. And that's how they come across it. And then they take it back to Russia with them, and Stalin puts it to one side, and it becomes his WMD, his scorched earth weapon, moving forward. The starting point for Purgatory, certainly for the shorter stories, kind of spilled out of the books that I'd read whilst researching the episode, like Stalingrad, the book by Anthony Beevor, and how when they'd run out of weapons and tactics, essentially what kept both armies going was the NCOs, these small groups of people who were just determined to try and get their people alive throughout the conflict and failing. And it was an image from the movie Enemy at the Gates that jumped out at me. This image of a lone German officer in a railway car at the edge of the battle, just watching his resources get pulled into the city and killed, and needing just such an NCO, just such a go-to guy to try and find his missing son. In many ways, Sergeant Lessing is based heavily on the character of Kurt Steiner from The Eagle Has Landed, but equally, he's influenced by The Old Man, who's a tank NCO from the Sven Hassel series of novels, which have been a massive influence on how I write. If you're not familiar with them, track them down and read them. They're a really hard read. They're really visceral in terms of the loss of life and the politics around warfare, that they're as maddening as Catch-22 in terms of the insane decisions and situations that people face. That's not to say there's not controversy to them. Sven Hassel claimed to have experienced most of the things in the books when he was in the SS during the war. It's since been proven that looking at the times and dates and battles and units involved, that he probably made a lot of it up. There's also a really awful movie adaptation, which Oliver Reed randomly turns up in, called The Misfit Brigade, which I watched recently. Don't watch it. It's awful. I'd love to see a decent adaptation one day. Are we going to see Sergeant Lessing again? Maybe. Or maybe he's in that Junkers that gets shot down trying to flee the city. I don't know yet, if I'm honest. But aside from Lessing, one person that we have already seen again is Corporal Bulgan, who's pretty much the Russian equivalent of him, who crops up during Purgatory duty and is cut from a very similar cloth. The idea of the Siberians being Stalin's bagmen for this, I think, was reflective of their wider role during the actual war. But I needed to give them a human side as well. I hate two-dimensional characters. They really annoy me. So in addition to being these pretty talented killers, I wanted to emphasize that they could feel loss as well, like any other soldier. Bulgan became quite addictive to me in terms of a character, so I had to promote him and then bring him back for a post-war adventure, which I've already done. And there's a temptation now, because I've thought of another thing that he could do, to bring his unit back as some sort of supernatural Soviet hit squad for the rest of the war. The idea that as they advance further into Germany, they meet odd situations they have to deal with, and they're the guys you bring in for it. The idea of weaponizing the zombies was lifted quite heavily from The Walking Dead, and in particular in the TV show where Rick's party find the prison, and there's a bunch of guards in SWAT gear wandering around, which raises the question, how do you kill a zombie in body armor? Alongside that, the acid vat sequence was pretty much lifted out of Tim Burton's Batman. That was my Batman of my generation. Do the maths. And that imagery of these big acid vats that people fall into and come out of, like the Joker, was directly from that. Luckily, having researched the battle, there was a chemical plant district in Stalingrad, and there were some heavily damaged factories there, so I felt generally that worked, weaving it into the narrative. Sorokin, I think I've said this before, is my next attempt to try and come up with a bad guy as layered and evil as Lucius Varus. The NKVD, in most terms, were as feared, if not more so, than the SS in terms of the evil they carried out during the war. And I see Sorokin as an embodiment of the Russian attitude to war. There ain't no sacrifice, there's no price in terms of human life that he won't pay for success. But there's a desperate edge as well, because his fate is tied into the fate of the zombie experiment as a whole. We've already seen him, again, in addition to the cameo he has when he turns up in The Oath. And as with Bulgan, I kind of am tempted to bring him back in some other stories now. Him being the guy that ends up going to all the supernatural or alien or weird encounters the Soviet army have. A little bit like Commander Shepard from the British side, but a lot more comfortable and ruthless with what he does. The idea behind Spiral, of all places, actually comes from the Star Wars universe. And that's the idea that at the end of most of the movies, as they close out, there's usually 3 different battlefields in play. So if you think back, certainly to the original movies, at the end of each one, you end up with a Jedi lightsaber sequence. There's a space battle going on where they've got to destroy something. There's usually a land battle as well. And I thought, can I do something similar with the Purgatory verse? I mean, can I even call it the Purgatory verse for starters? So in addition to what's going on in the city itself, you've also got what's going on the Volga, the Volga River, and a battle in the air as well. There isn't a lot when you scout about online that's been written about the Volga fleet, about the motorboats that were on there, and that's why I was drawn to talking about them in contingency. And in a way, I feel the same about the Luftwaffe. Most times they only get referred to as Stukas bombing the river and bombing the city. And the reality is there were huge dogfights taking place between German and Soviet fighters over Stalingrad every day. The bombers would come in, one set of fighters would try and stop them, another would go in and they'd go at it like Billy-O. And my vision was just seeing that playing out almost in separation to the zombie horde below. But then there's inevitability that if you bail out, you ain't going to survive. Much like for the Pact, how I'd been drawn back to the image of the three knocked out tanks and working there, plotting around the fate of their crews. The deaths of Private Schultz and Klein also called me back. And again, it was Enemy at the Gates I went to. I mean, yeah, the accents aren't great in that film, but the action sequences certainly are. With the idea that they're just part of a number of sniper units on both sides that have been dancing around each other around the entire conflict. And as they die, as the two German snipers die on top of the roof, their Soviet counterpart is literally sat opposite, watching it happen, and actually gets drawn into it in the slight rewrite that I've done here. And sadly for Markle, Private Bilic, his personal battle is as traumatic, if not more so, than any other. Spending days, perhaps nights, trapped in the stairwell with only his knife, fighting off a whole zombie horde, surviving off pure hate. It's a story of trauma that even turns the hearts of the Siberians who find him and have got orders to liquidate any survivors, which brings him into that unit, which also then results in him joining up with Bulgan after the war to go off to Didinka and potentially other places as well with his sniper's rifle. But of all of the shorts, all 6 of them, and I always wanted to do 3 German ones and 3 Russian ones, The Oath, the last one, actually was one of the hardest to write. The easy part was trying to play out the tensions between the SS and the Wehrmacht, which I kind of feel, again, in a lot of movies, a lot of TV shows, it's glossed over. There's a tendency for cinema to portray the SS as these monocle-wearing fanatics, Hitler loyalists, who are completely blinded by propaganda and just do whatever they think is right for the Führer. From reading a lot of books on World War II, the answer is that essentially these were your school bullies. They were not brave, they weren't bright, pretty naive and stupid, and as long as things were going fine, they were fine. And when things went wrong, they were as likely to save their skin as anyone else. The idea behind this story being that as the Soviet encirclement tightens, the German units are much with war with itself as they are with everyone else, between traditional values of honour and loyalty and the new regime of self-preservation and selfishness. The problem, that was the easy part, pitching them against each other. The problem was then trying to find a way of introducing a cure to the virus for the doctors that wasn't complete cliche, because I hate cliche. I wanted Reich to be able to find a hint of success. Not full success, what he's doing might not even work, but something that could be convincing or plausible as to reversing the effects. And I'm not a doctor, I've no medical background, so I had to use Dr. Google. And I hope it worked. The idea of a localised wartime lobotomy, making an impact on the parts of the brain that are diseased, the tissue there. I hope it works. I couldn't figure out another way of doing it. So in the end, I had to run with it. In closing out, I'd say that's it for now. I don't have any more Purgatory stories, and I worry that to try and do more would end up devaluing that chapter as a whole. I'm not saying I'm not open to ideas. I'm nothing if not prepared to go back on myself. And if I could pull together an equal number of Russian-led and German-led stories to keep the sequence going, I'd consider it. But outside that, the zombies are done. They've served their purpose. You might recall, if you're really boring enough to watch these videos, that when I started, I said I wanted to avoid the cliche of zombie movies, World War II zombie movies, because they're just identikit. Open, insert mad Nazi scientist, close. But I folded, I went with it. I do feel proud of what I've done here. I think it's different enough to all those crappy World War II zombie movies that came out after Outpost to stand on its own. And full disclosure, I haven't played the computer games with zombies and Stalingrad in, so I don't know how it compares to those. But it needs to go to bed now. And I need to figure out which one of the characters that are featured in it can come back in their own right in other stories I've got planned. But then that might be the easy part, because in all fairness, there aren't many of them left alive, are there?